Well, at Club and Eagle tonight we celebrate and remember the great career of one of the legends of harness racing in JD Watts. Of course, when you speak of the Watts family, you automatically think of Fairfield and some of the wonderful achievements they produced from that particular track. Another hero from the Fairfield days is about to join me. I'm delighted to say Garry Hancock is with me. Well, Garry, after many, many years, it's great to catch up with you again here at Club and Angle.
Yeah, pleasure, Mick.
I just mentioned JD Watts and Fairfield. You would have had a long association with the Watts family.
Yes, I knew JD when I first moved up from Junee, but I didn't appreciate who the man was. But I've had a lot of fun and learned a hell of a lot of Colin over the years.
No doubt you had some wonderful moments there when you were speaking to Colin when you caught up with him.
Yes, I watched Colin Bromack race, and I watched it with Colin and had a yarn with him before the race and after the race, and I said I'll be back next year to watch it with you again.
Yeah, before we have a look at your career, let's jump straight in at the deep end. 1996, the Inter-Dominion, Gloucester Park, young Mr. Charles.
Yes, that's just a memory you can't get rid of. It'll last forever. It was a very, very hard fortnight, but the result in the end was absolutely worth it. It was absolute thrill.
Garry, what was he like to train?
Absolute pleasure. He done all the work. I just geared him up and he went out and worked himself and told me exactly what he wanted to do. He was just a pleasure.
How was the level of confidence going into the race?
Well, at the barrier draw, I said after the barrier we drew, I said he'll lead and he'll win, and I was really confident. As long as he got the front line, I knew he'd be very, very hard to beat.
So the driving instructions to Peter Morris were simple.
Well, you didn't give him any instructions because he done what he wanted to do anyway, so it didn't matter.
Garry, what a wonderful performer, young Mr. Charles. 124 starts, 40 wins, 14 seconds, 17 thirds, 879,000 in prize money.
Yeah, he was an absolute champion. And a lot of people don't remember. He won, I think, 3 Melbourne miles, and the last one he won with Frank Scaravilli driving him. And for the last 400 metres, Frank only had one rein. He was a special horse.
You mentioned Frank Scaravilli, the owner of young Mr. Charles, a very loyal supporter of yours.
Yeah, I had a really, really good association with him and his wife Rosa. We just clicked. We only had one blue, and which is Frank was renowned for having a blue with people, but we only had one, and yeah, I had a really good association with him. Appreciate it.
He was a rather flamboyant character.
Yeah, yes, very, very flamboyant. He could get very, very excited, but he was just so passionate. You know, he wanted his horses to win, and which we all do, but he just got over the top sometimes.
Well, I just mentioned the placings in that 1996 Inter-Dominion Sunshine Band for Chris Gleeson and the great Kiwi master musician.
Yeah, all Inter-Dominions in that concept were great races, and they were all really, really good horses in their own right. Yeah.
Garry, your involvement in harness racing, how did it all start?
Well, I always liked horses. I always went over to Richard and Brian Hancock's father, Cyril's place, and played around with the horses when I was in Junee. And one of my uncles, Alan Doherty, he had horses and I played around with them. And then when I went to Fairfield, I just went down the track, and I used to help Colin and JD when they came over to Hobble, and Lou Sweeney when he came into Hobble, and then I formed an association with Peter Morris after that.
You just mentioned Brian and Richard Hancock, of course, related to those two particular characters.
Yeah, my father was a cousin of Richard and Brian's, and my father, he was especially really good friends with Richard.
You just mentioned Lou Sweeney, a name I haven't heard of for a long, long while. A very astute trainer, a man who knew how to get a quid.
He taught me a lot in that aspect, to get your own, son. If you want any money out of this industry, get your own. And he was a great character. And unfortunately, I did have a drink with him the night before he passed at Bathurst, and he was in really good spirit and what have you. It was just a shock, complete shock to lose him like that.
What made you decide to leave Fairfield?
I always liked going to Queensland for the Winter Carnival, and I just sort of thought, well, I started the family, and I said I'm going to go to Queensland, and I just packed up and away I went. And I really enjoyed it for the 20 years I was up there, but now I've just retired back to Junee and live a very quiet life.
But you still have a very deep involvement with the Morris family. You come up and help Peter along, and also Robbie and Kerry Ann.
Yes, yeah, I come up and do, when they get stuck from time to time, I'll come up and do the joggers for them in the car or what have you. But I especially like going away with Carrie Ann to Melbourne. When she goes to Melbourne to campaign horses, I jump in the car and I class myself as a professional passenger these days.
Gary, you've seen a lot of changes in harness racing, the times we run these days and the athletic horses we have. Big difference from those small tracks as Fairfield and Bankstown?
It's completely different. It took a long time to sink in the fast times they were running. I just couldn't understand how they could run faster times than what they did back in the day. But that's just progress, and different harnesses, different gigs and different racing. It's completely different to what I learned.
Gary, you were involved in harness racing in Harold Park in particular during a wonderful period of racing at that particular venue. Some of your idols?
Oh, well, Kevin Newman was an idol to many. Perce Hall when I first sort of kicked off. And then Colin Watts, especially Colin, he used to say to me from a young kid, I think you better have $1 each way this one tonight. And 9 times out of 10 they'd win. As I say, he was a very good mentor for me.
Gary, is there one thing about Colin's training that you learnt and carried through your career?
Yeah, the 2 heats, working 2 heats. He was very steady the first heat, and then he wound him up the second heat, but it just gave the horses that little bit extra work without putting any pressure on them. And I kept that in my mind for my whole career.
As we've mentioned, you've had a long and a wonderful association with the Morris family. Now, we've both known this little fella since the time the only thing he could sit in was a pram. Now he's got over 2,000 wins to his name in the sulky, and I'm referring to Robbie. You must be very proud of what he's achieved.
Oh, yeah. For what him and Carrie Ann have achieved over the years is really, really good. When Robert was about 3, he used to follow me around the stables, and in the end he started walking with his back bent over, and Margaret, his mother, was terrified. Gary, it's making stand up straight. I was right. There's nothing wrong with walking like this. He was a character, but yeah, he's drove all the good races. He's driven all the tracks, and it doesn't matter which track, where he goes. He's 100% all the time with his driving, and his timing is perfect.
They always say a trainer is capable of making a return even though he's retired. If a good one comes along, you completely closed your book as far as training is concerned?
Completely, Mick. Yeah, no more. I'm just a professional passenger with Carrie Ann when she goes away, and that's my involvement these days. No, wouldn't.
And Lucky Lodge, Gary, perfectly run, as you mentioned, Carrie Ann and Robbie, but a lot of help there with Josh Gallagher, Alicia Bond, Chloe Formosa. It's a wonderful team.
Oh, they've had some wonderful workers there over the years, which you have to have. It's any business that's got to have good workers to be successful, and they have. And you just look at the people Robert and Carrie Ann have taught the young junior drivers, as Josh, and before them, they've all turned out very good drivers.
You've mentioned some of the greats. Who was just on the driving part of it was the best driver you saw?
I always go back to Kevin Newman. I just idolised him. I remember one of my first drives at Harold Park. I was sitting one out, one back, and we straightened up for the bell, and I never had a horse in front of me. I was 3 wide. He said, and he just looked at me and he laughed. He said, "You'll learn that one day, boy."
They certainly had a lot of tricks. Those good drivers and who went on to become legends, and that's probably the part we forget about it. And a little bit disappointing about all those greats. We sort of like forget about them. We should always remember the greats.
Exactly. The junior drivers, I don't think they get taught enough about the old days. They race on big tracks. They race in the big gigs. There's no pushing and shoving. They earn good money, so you didn't. They comes easy to them, and they just don't appreciate what the pioneer people went through and how hard it was. And getting to racetracks, they all drive their big F100s and what have you now. You had a 4-cylinder pulling 2 horses, back in them days.
Well, Gary, not only has it been great to catch up with you for this interview, but it's been great to catch up with you here tonight. It's been many, many years since our paths have crossed. Hopefully it's not going to be the same anymore, but it's been great to catch up with you. Thanks for your time tonight, Gary.
Thank you very much, Mick. Appreciate it. Thank you.